Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. This is one that I've been looking for a while in terms of size and meatiness, but maybe not exactly what I was looking for, and we'll get into that. I am reviewing The Battle for Metagore by D.L. Stewart. This is a very thick high fantasy with a lot of war and conflict and gore. Metagore. I'm not sorry. Anyway, this revolves around the land of Metagore, and it's been helmed for the longest time by one leader, and he's loved by everybody, but he dies. And there's a little bit of a side plot in which they're like, was it natural causes? Was it poison? We're not sure, and there's a little bit, but mostly it's about the actual ensuing conflict as a result of that. Now, this is the first time in this land's history that its leader has died because its leader was an elf who lived for a very long time, and the Viscounts decide that they are going to elect a new leader from amongst themselves. All fun and games until the other, Grand Dukes of other lands that make up Metagore realize this, and they're not happy with the choice, and not really with the way of picking a new heir in general. The only race of beings that can be picked are elves, and there might low-key be some racism from other Grand Dukes. I'm not quite sure if it was supposed to be racism, but it kind of came across that way. They're like, well, why shouldn't we pick from one of us? Why don't we have a say? And the council's like, no, screw you. This is how we said we're doing it, so we're doing it. And as a result, multiple of the Grand Dukes decide that, well, screw you, I'm going to take it over. Now, originally, I thought, oh, this is going to be like some of the Grand Dukes wanting to change the situation and some of the Grand Dukes backing the Brighthelm, the center of it. No, it was pretty much the couple backing Brighthelm, and then everyone else was for himself. Everyone else wanted to fight everybody else, and it became a thing. So there's a lot of world building here, just so much. So first you have what I believe are 6 kingdoms or 6 lands that are primarily invested in the story, and then there are some other ones that are outliers that aren't really all that pertinent to the conflict. And then there are a lot of different races of beings, and these races of beings aren't specific to the land, like in a lot of fantasy you see, be like, this is the land of the elves and this is the land of the humans, and there are some races that are specific to certain, biomes that must stay in their land because they can't survive well in other, temperatures or away from water or what have you. But for the most part, there's also a lot of species that go everywhere. And so there was, levels on levels of world building. And then there were, deities and a dragon fight at one point, couple dragon fights. So if you like Skyrim and that kind of political turmoil plus dragons, you'll probably enjoy this one. And at first, I was really intrigued. And the beginning of a high fantasy is never that easy. Inherently, there is this kind of a learning curve in getting into it. This book particularly, I originally thought the opening was kind of clumsy, but then it actually ended up being really helpful. It begins with essentially the Grand Dukes and the Lord, who is still alive at that point, BTW. It's not a spoiler that he dies, it's in the synopsis that he does, and also it's a kindly older leader figure at the beginning of a high fantasy. Those dudes never survive past 50 pages anyway. But all the Grand Dukes are there, and they're kind of doing this New Year's type announcement thing where they're all like, in our land we shall do this year. And so it's basically these are the lands, these are their leaders. And at first I was like, well, that's just a ton of exposition. But then later on, I actually ended up having that open on a separate device, because I get them in PDFs when they're ebook form, and then on my Kindle. So I had on my laptop and on my Kindle so that I could reference back to the beginning, okay, wait, which one is this dude? And that's to be expected for the beginning of a high fantasy. The struggle with this one was that feeling of not knowing never really relented with me. And this is not a small book. This is 500 pages exactly, I believe. And so I was expecting okay, a couple hundred pages in, I should be getting the general gist of, okay, this is the foresty land and these are the people, and this is the deserty land and these are the people. And it took a really long time to get that. And I think it's purely because you had 6 different worlds you were trying to build up while they were also fighting each other, and while there were also 10 different characters when within each of those worlds. It's like, you know how some people complain that George R.R. Martin wrote Game of Thrones to be too slow? This is like the opposite problem. Like this plot moved at a breakneck pace the entire time. It's death and destruction and battle, and this place is sieged and this place is captured, and like so much of that in a very short period of time. And you wouldn't think that because it's a 500-page book, so obviously it must be, you know, long. It didn't feel long, both in a good way and in a bad way, because it's like very few characters' names that actually stick with me. I will say, side note, and again, I don't make this a requirement. I mentioned this in another high fantasy review, but I love when queer characters are involved, and this book does have a badass shape-shifting lesbian elf, and she was my favorite. I loved her. I thought it was so funny that, like, she talks about, you know, all the other men talk about having a missus at home, and she's like, oh, me too. It was great. I loved it. Well, I guess I don't know that she was lesbian. I just know that she had a female partner at home. So I loved that part. That was random. Side note, but whatever. But, like, out of the characters from this book, out of, like, the couple dozen you're given, like, 5 stuck out to me. And that's including, like, leaders. Like, actual, like, we are leading this place. Like, even then, I was like, I can barely remember what you're leading. So, like, vaguely, I know you're in charge of this general thing, I think. A lot of the characters are also not very good people. If you like a lot of noble, upstanding characters in your high fantasy, this is not it. In most cases, you're either morally gray / evil / good but naive and are probably going to be conquered. That's usually about where this stands. I can think of like a couple characters that were portrayed as both being morally good and competent. Everyone seemed some level of either evil or incompetent. And speaking of incompetence, the struggle I had with the plot points, outside of it being very fast, is the crux of it of we don't want to do this any different way didn't stick with me all that much, because this is the first time that this has really happened. This is the first time they've had to elect a new lord, because the last one reigned for like, I think it was supposed to be like 600 years. So this is the first time, so this idea of this is the way we must do it didn't really ring true, because it's like, well, you've never done this before, so why can't you do something else? And when you announce it to the Grand Dukes that you're doing it this way, and like 3 of them immediately say, okay, we're gonna go wage war on you, at what point do you be like, maybe we should rethink things? And the lore that actually takes over, it's very rare for me that a book tells me, or a book character thinks I'm pathetic, and I agree with them. But Cornelius was pathetic. Which feels so mean to say, but he really was, because he's the youngest of the Viscounts when he's elected, and he's never really happy about it. But it takes him forever even to start thinking, hey, maybe my appointment to this position, which immediately led to gigantic war, was a bad idea. Like, maybe I should have stepped back and not caused a gigantic war. And it was hard for me to be invested in him, and as a result, it was hard for me to see the justification and the entire point of the conflict. I still enjoyed the war aspects. I'm a lot more of a lover of that kind of thing than I think I come across a lot of times. I love like a nice meaty war in a high fantasy. And so I didn't mind the war aspects, but it never seemed justified to me. The gore also at times seemed very much in that gore for gore's sake, where it was like, here's this random character, they're dead. Here's a bunch of other characters dying. At one point, like, the sheer amount of characters that were being felled in the span of like 2 pages was a lot. And it almost felt like the author was trying to like move pieces off the playing board to clear it out and focus more on the few characters there were. And it's just like, it never I don't know, like I said before, it was very breakneck pace. It was very fast. It was a lot of world building. It's one of those books you can't really read quickly, which that might be to your tastes. I don't know. I'm not in charge of your life. But for me, it was almost like I stopped trying after a certain point. Be like, I'm just never gonna figure out what that guy was in charge of. And I mean, this place has already fallen, so why am I gonna bother to remember that one? Like, there were some parts where I was like, why was this land even important? We could have cut that land out entirely and cleared up some space and some world building to focus on. There was also gods, like I mentioned before, and there was some commentary on, are they actually gods, or are they just very powerful beings that they don't understand and therefore call them gods? Which, I'm not gonna lie, I haven't seen that a lot in high fantasy, and I would love that idea more of people realizing these beings they portray as gods aren't gods, haha, JK, they're just really powerful beings you didn't understand. That would be funny to me. I would love that, but I like that kind of aspect. But there was, again, a lot of gore. Even the gods got gory, which, I mean, yeah, it's kind of like ancient Greece or, you know, any one of those number of ancient gods that loved gore. But in general, this is definitely a book where you have to love, well, not love. I don't want to say that you love the bloodshed, but at least you don't mind bloodshed if you want to like this book. There's a lot of world building, a lot of creatures, a lot of descriptions, a lot of creature names that I'm sure if you're up to date on fantasy, you know all of them, but I did not know all the names, and it wasn't like any of the big ones. Like when they mentioned like a Leviathan or a Hydra or whatever, like, okay, yeah, I have a general idea of what those are, but some other ones, I was like, I should know what that mythical creature is, shouldn't I? But half the time, I didn't bother to stop to look anything up. I usually don't when I read. Unless it's like prevalent and repeated, I might stop to look up a mythical being if the book hasn't described it. But for me, I feel like you should describe it in the book. But again, there were so many different species that that would have been so much exposition. So in general, I really thought about it and I had to give this book 3 stars. I don't think I can continue just because I think it's only going to get more complex as it goes on. And if at the end of the book I still can't remember the names of the main places and who led them, I don't think the second book is going to miraculously clear that up. So I would definitely say if you are a slow, methodical reader that wants to maybe even low-key take notes, this might be the book for you. For me, and for my fast reading style where I would like everything that I need to enjoy the story in the story, it had to be a 3-star for me. It's still pretty decent in the actual action scenes. The action scenes were really cool. They're probably the star of it. That's why it's very plot driven. There were a few scenes that went a little bit more slowly. The relationship between Darius and Kai, for example, was really there. I'm going to forget her name. It was either Kalama or Kamala, and I'm going to switch out which is the names. But the Lord Brighton's widow, the widow of the previous Lord, her grief was really well done, and that funeral scene was really well done. So there are moments where it's there. It's just for so few characters that those are the only ones that really stuck with me, and the rest either weren't characters that I wanted to get to know or were killed off too quickly for me to bother trying. And to a certain extent, you get to the point where it's like, oh, a new character's introduced. I'm not even going to bother investing in you because you might be dead in 2 pages. So that was a bit of the issue. So if you like very heavy, very conflict-y, plot-driven books with a lot of world building in them that might take a little bit of a slower, methodical take, this is definitely the book for you. Unfortunately, not for me. I don't think I'll be continuing with this series. However, I would be open to reading something else from D.L. Stewart. I did like that I'm getting back into high fantasy in general. I know I have at least one other thicker high fantasy on my to-review list as of right now, and I'm really excited about that one. Now, if you are an indie author and you would like a review, please email me. I will have my email down in the description below, as well as my review policy. Please give that a read through. It answers a lot of questions and saves us a lot of time. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.